Thank you, and thank you all for joining today. This is so we're going to be a really kind of high level view of things in the sense that we've only got half an hour, and I could be talking about this topic for the next 2 months. But we will work through some content, some principles with you in the next sort of 35 to 40 minutes, and then leave some time for questions. And then in the follow-up survey, you'll also have the opportunity to book a one-to-one with me or do a wellbeing audit with me. So there is opportunity to explore these ideas further once you've finished today's session. So just to let you know that. Thank you, Martin, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. As Martin's introduced me, I have got a background in psychology and neuroscience. And I focus on helping companies to create cultures where people can think, feel, and perform at their best. We've got a team of 5 people based in the UK who are our core team. We've got 30 associates worldwide. And we make sure that we're always coming at things with this science-based lens, but turning things and the principles and the research that we have into practical applicational and functional things that work in businesses. And the reason I come with that very scientific angle is about 15 years ago, I would have said mental health isn't even on my radar. Well-being, I thought well-being was about having 5 fruit and veg a day and maybe getting enough sleep, going for the occasional run. And it was my personal experience of seeing what unhelpful workplace cultures can do to people, of being in that situation where I was not supported and developed in the way that really unlocked my potential. And having been quite a cynic at that stage, I decided that I wanted to understand what was driving how I show up at work, how I think, how I perform, how I behave, the influence I have on others. And so I would do the research, start to experiment with some of the research I was seeing and the research I was reading, and then apply that with the teams and the people I was working with. And I saw what a difference this could make. So that's how I've come to this, is through my own experience, being a bit of a cynic, knowing that there are a lot of people out there who say, oh, well-being's a lot of it's a fad, it's this, it's that. And really getting everybody on this journey of realizing mental health is a business asset. When we are thinking, feeling, performing at our best, we get more done, we come up with better ideas, we can push the boundaries of what's possible, and we can work with stress and pressure in a really positive way that actually elevates business performance. And that's what we're talking about today. So I'm going to invite Ella to move to the first slide, which is just going to give you an introduction to what we're actually going to cover. Firstly, I'm going to share, we've done some introductions, but I'm going to share next a few of the bits of data around really what is mental health and the business case for putting more emphasis on creating a positive mental health culture and how that can make a difference. Then going to look at some of the commonly untapped performance, so untapped opportunities that drive high performance, look at some of the barriers that prevent high performance and mental health, and then work through to the role of senior leaders in driving this strategy and what you are going to take away to put into action as a result. So really going to make sure that that number 6 on this slide is about you taking a commitment away to do something different. Because otherwise, today's just a nice little way to enjoy your lunch break and it doesn't mean anything. So make the most of it. Ella's going to now just put a Slido out there to get some ideas on what inspired you all to come today. So there's a Slido there for you to get involved in. And while we're doing that, I'm going to just oh, we got some responses. Hopefully that's working. Just going to also invite you, if there's nothing on there that really resonates, or if you're putting something else then do feel free to add into the chat function what else it is that's brought you to today. Interesting. So generally an interest, but also that lack of leadership buy-in, which is so commonly the challenge. The number of people that I speak to and I work with, and I have to say it's usually the same journey. I'll speak to someone who's head of talent or head of HR or learning director, and they'll come to me and they'll say, okay, well, we're going to put this to board. And then they'll come back to me sort of a few months later and go, okay, well, board have pushed it. You know, it's just been knocked down the line. There's something bigger, right? There's something bigger on the radar. And there's this constant churn. And very often it takes to actually, we come in and we'll help companies with this because it's really difficult to persuade senior leaders who have got so many different things. It's really difficult to get that buy-in for really them not just giving budget for these initiatives and these strategies, but understanding that they need to role model it, they need to lead it, they need to drive it, they need to integrate mental health into every single business decision. So real common challenge. Also, yes, that companies are not measuring effectively to understand the tangible benefits. It is a difficult thing to analyze, but really making sure there's robust data then supports the next round of getting that leadership buy-in. So they're definitely holding hands there, those second and third items that we're seeing. And I'm seeing is a couple of ideas into the chat function there as well about the importance of driving down sickness absence, which is absolutely one of those data points that is maybe easier for us to see. As we've already said, our company, Step Inside Group, we'll move on to the next slide, is all about applying a science-based approach to drive peak performance and well-being. We do that through leadership development, consultancy, so that we're actually looking at that bigger picture, mental health and crisis support, and corporate wellness programs. Now, with that, the organizational consultancy is really helping every company apply a science-based approach to any problem, any business issue, but making sure it's approaching those problems, those issues in a way that promotes positive mental health. If we talk about this idea of just mental health, in the chat function, what does that term mental health mean to you all? Into the chat function, what does mental health mean to you all? Just a couple of words, what does mental health? How we feel. Yeah, I'm imagining that given the people who are on this program on today's session, you know what mental health is. How you feel, good or bad. It's interesting, this terminology, good or bad, isn't it? So it's a very challenging one. Resilience and well-being, I feel like they're cheat words, I'm afraid, because we find that they're words and we go, well, what does that mean? What does well-being mean? Free from harm, free from worry. And again, like there's a lot of this, it's really, really good. But it is also understanding as we see all of this, and we've got some nice quotes on the next slide, that mental health is not always about being free of worry. It's about feeling good and functioning well, absolutely. When we're in optimal, positive mental health, we feel good and we function well. We can cope with stress well, but it doesn't necessarily always mean we're stress-free. Because realistically, life can be stressful, right? We're never going to eliminate that, but we can work with that stress and the challenges and the issues in a way that helps us so that we can realize our full potential. And what we can see is that from the research over time, it used to be seen until just really the early 2000s when the first publication came out in 2004, which prior to that point, people saw mental health as this good or bad. You either have positive mental health, you're healthy, you're mentally able to motivate yourself, or you're mentally unwell, you struggle with day-to-day life. And it was a very binary view of things until the early 2000s. And then in 2004, a researcher called Corey Keyes did the first bit of research into the dual continuum, which indicated that there's much more complexity to mental health. And it showed that, yes, some people have a diagnosis of a mental illness and others don't. Okay, and we've got that on the x-axis here, that some people have a diagnosis of illness and others don't. And whereas traditionally it was viewed that if you had an illness, you would struggle, you would need time off work, you probably weren't going to find it easy to stay in a job or be an effective contributing team member. But if you had mental health, you were absolutely fine, you should be a good team member, you should be able to deal with things. Corey Keyes identified that yes, there was this x-axis, but that diagnosis or lack of didn't determine how well someone was able to cope on a day-to-day basis. And actually, there was this other y-axis of high well-being, or as I call it, high mental fitness and low mental fitness. So actually, our ability to show up, think well, be creative, motivate ourselves when maybe motivation is low, find that little inner push to push a little bit further when we're facing a challenge, all of that stuff, which is about creating a mindset and an approach that unlocks the massive capacity that our brains have, that was possible to have that high mental fitness, even if you had a diagnosis of bipolar, depression, anxiety, some illness that was a diagnosable condition. So on the left side here, you see that while someone can have an illness, some people with an illness might have a diagnosis and manage on a day-to-day very well because they know what triggers it. They can actually really work with that mental illness in a way that helps them potentially. Some people with a diagnosis might struggle. They might not be able to motivate themselves all the time. They might need medication, but it's about making sure that everybody has the support to, ideally with a diagnosis, still perform at their best. In a workplace, we're not going to be able to eradicate mental illness, but we can help everybody, regardless of whether they have an illness or not, to be mentally fit. On the right side, you see the opposite, that some people who might not have a diagnosis, yes, they can be on the top there, where they've got high levels of mental fitness, they've got positive mental health, they're engaged, they're creative, they support other colleagues, fantastic. But actually, even if someone doesn't have an illness, there can be many, many people in organizations who just haven't got the level of mental fitness that they need. They're doing bare minimum. They're getting by. They're struggling. They're kind of coping. They're turning up. I've still got a job. Fine. But they haven't got the mental fitness or the drive or that inner motivation to really make sure they're contributing as much as they possibly could to an organization. And equally, they aren't feeling good about their contributions. So they're not thinking at their best. They're just turning up and taking the paycheck. And what his research showed and what he's consistently showed is that about 10% of the population are so far down in the bottom right quadrant, so low well-being with no illness, so far down that they're what we consider languishing. They're almost disengaged from life. They're just there. And from the research subsequently that we've seen from McKinsey, from Deloitte, from many of the other organizations who put out a lot of public papers about this, is that it's this area that is the biggest cost and often the hidden cost to employers. It's not people with illness. It's the people who are potentially just not showing up. There's low productivity. So we've got some of the latest stats on the next slide, which shows that poor mental health is costing employers £51 billion a year in the UK alone. But that is not just sickness absence, it's actually about voluntary attrition and about presenteeism, so low productivity because people are doing bare minimum. They are making mistakes. They're just getting by. There's no discretionary effort and there's no sense of purpose and commitment from people that we need to help companies optimize their performance. And if we can take a positive approach to supporting and promoting mental health, there's actually a 4.7 return on investment for every pound. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck if you're investing wisely. And what I mean is not just putting in, oh, we'll give everyone insurance for when stuff goes wrong, or we'll hire someone to act and maybe support people if there's an issue, or we'll train managers to deal with when issues arise. That's a foundation. What we want to do to maximize that return on that investment in mental health and well-being is we want to say, how do we take everybody on that continuum, because we're all on there somewhere, how do we take everybody up a bit? Because that is what we see is going to have the biggest financial impact on a business and globally on people. So research has shown that if we could shift the entire population up 2 or 3% on that y-axis, we'd have a bigger global impact than if we did eradicate all illness. So that's about supporting your entire workforce to be 2 or 3% mentally fitter every single day in how they show up. Now, what this looks like, and I'm actually gonna invite Ella to just skip the next Slido for now, if that's all right, and just share some of the data around this. So we see that when companies take this very proactive approach of optimizing mental fitness, the results are higher levels of engagement, lower levels of absenteeism, which I've seen in the chat is a key priority for people. There's better talent retention and attraction. We're seeing that there is improved productivity, and also, as you'll see specifically here in terms of that Salesforce example, increased customer satisfaction. So your clients are happier if you do this. I see that there's some comments in the chat function, but I'm not going to be able to read that. But hopefully that's going to be captured by Ella and Martin. I just want you to know that the data is there, and you will get these slides afterwards so you can go to the senior leadership teams to emphasize that there is a return on investment. In fact, FTSE 100 companies show that we get a much higher shareholder return, so a 61% shareholder return over 10 years compared to a 51 for those companies who are investing and showing a higher level of mental fitness in employees. That's not just low absenteeism. So to do this, as I've emphasized already, and I'm going to build on this now, it is not just about responding to poor mental health. It is not just about restoring poor mental health after a disruption or a crisis. To maximize people's return on investment and to make mental health a business asset is about promoting optimal mental fitness, preventing poor mental fitness and poor mental health before it arises. Knowing what are the risk factors, what are the issues, what are the problems that we can be aware of. And every decision a company comes to saying, how do we turn this into an opportunity to maximize well-being? What are the risks by us taking on this next project? What are the risks that is going to put into our organization that we need to address now? And that is what that is all about. So if we just come back to the previous slide there, Ella. So with this in mind, most companies we see, they come to us and they say, oh, we want to train our managers on this. We've got this problem. And only the elite, the mentally fit elite companies, the best of the best, are the ones who are saying, we think we can help people be that bit better. We want to improve discretionary effort. We want to improve motivation. Our engagement surveys are down. How do we move that? And that's where we see that a lot of companies are measuring the wrong data because they see well-being over here on one side and engagement over here. But actually, well-being drives engagement. Well-being drives innovation. Well-being drives retention. And we need to be bringing those together to create a culture of well-being, a culture of mental health. So I'm going to share today a bit more on the promoting optimal well-being because it is the area that I see most companies are failing to address. We missed one Slido there, which I was going to ask you to bring some thoughts on whether your current strategy is addressing positive mental health and how we improve it. But I'm conscious of time and want to make sure I give you enough time to ask your questions, hence the skip on that. But I do want to share with you some of the key things that you can do immediately. So you've got some takeaways to promote positive mental health. So this is about that upside. How do we take action? Safety being psychological safety. Safety being psychological safety. Very misinterpreted topic. Psychological safety, very often companies think it's about making people feel stress-free and comfortable and making sure everyone can bring their whole self to work. Yes, absolutely. That is this much of what safety is all about. Safety is about making sure that everybody in the organization has the permission to have a go at stuff and learn things well. Ask questions, and they're not in fear of being reprimanded for asking a question or for making a mistake or for not knowing. It's about creating that learning culture. It's about creating a culture where people feel they can look around and say, I've got an idea. I haven't been asked for an idea, but I think we could do that better. And people feel the connection to their colleagues, the permission that they can say that without being told, just get back in your box. They have that permission and they have the trust of people. So it's about this learning, it's about this contribution, and it's about challenging. It's about having the freedom of every person in an organization to challenge the status quo, to say, what are we missing? And this does need to be role modeled from the top, that leaders need to be comfortable saying, actually, what am I missing? I don't know everything. As a leader, I am here to help you come up with the solutions that are better than mine because I've got you as a great team. So how do you use the collective brain power of everybody by encouraging challenge? So psychological safety is much broader than just making people feel comfortable. It's making people use stress in a positive way, challenge the status quo to keep the business moving forward, 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 forward. And to help people feel like they're part of that in a meaningful way, to driving more meaning. And that needs to be done on all sorts of different levels, not just a psychological safety training for selective people. Inclusion and social support is very much done within that safety component, but also as an additional element of making sure we are having cultures workplace cultures that include everybody and make everything accessible to people, build relationships across teams, across functions, across geographies. It's becoming an increasing challenge for businesses when they are working globally. You know, a lot of the big firms that we do a lot of work with Amazon, with Soho House. You've got teams who are working on many different time zones in different places. You've got to make sure that everything you're providing, every training, every engagement, every communication is meeting the needs of diverse viewpoints, diverse values, and helping people to build relationships so that those people in those teams can understand each other. So really, really important that it's about helping people understand each other, not just managers knowing, I know how to manage inclusion. I know what is exclusion. It's about creating that connection between people. We're seeing a much higher level of focus on that area at the moment being in intergenerational challenges. So 70% of leaders say they struggle to communicate and build collaboration in the current state of the businesses because of intergenerational conflict. They say there's some level of people who have been in the organization a little bit longer, pointing the finger at the younger ones and saying that generation, they are X, Y, and Z, and pointing the finger the other way, some of the younger generation think, oh, well, you don't understand your X, Y, and Z. So really intergenerational being important. And again, when you come to changing things in this space, you can do things with both groups, but actually bringing them together to create connection is much more sustainable in the long run, much more powerful. We're coming then to the third one on that top line, which is purpose and meaning. When people feel that their personal values align with the organizational values, there's much higher levels of buy-in to everything. People go that one step further, not just because I've got to, but they find an inner motivation. There's an I want to contribute. I want to put a bit more effort. I want to help that person. I want to help that client because this is just part of my DNA. Not just the business DNA, not just the numbers and the letters on the wall, the lovely business values that companies have got plastered all over their website. Come work for us because we're about integrity. Yes, the company might be about integrity, but each individual in that business needs to know, what does that mean for me? And does that matter to me? And if something similar but not quite the same does matter, then how do I find where that crosses over with some of the organizational values? So helping employees understand what company values mean in their day-to-day role, every single conversation they have, every day, how they show up, building those values into rituals and routines, and then helping people to understand why that personally matters to them, how that helps them. So cultivating this sense of purpose and meaning to increase internal motivation to do things, that inner drive, much more sustainable, and it reduces burnout, increases engagement, and improves cognitive performance. So powerful outcomes. Once we start going along the bottom line here and we start to think about work-life harmony, you'll notice that that is not just work-life balance. It's about helping people, helping organizations to consider, how do we make sure people feel that their work fuels their life, makes them a better person, a better life, a better experience outside of work? And then also, how do their life experiences outside of the workplace help them to contribute more to their work? How do we find that mutual benefit both ways? That's what work-life harmony is about, and we're increasingly finding there is no one size fits all. It is about looking at organizations, about organizational structures, about what processes there are and policies there are, but also about then how individuals are supported to work with those policies in a way that really works for them, not just, oh, this is what it should look like. Resilience and positive stress. I've spoken a little bit about this idea of positive pressure. How do we help people to work with pressure in a positive way? A lot of what is needed in this space is to make sure people really understand what resilience is, seeing it not just as toughening up. Resilience is about being able to deal with stuff. There is an element of mental toughness, being able to accept that life isn't perfect. We didn't write the rule book to how experience was going to be. But also knowing that resilience is about knowing when to push through and when to give up, when to take a different approach, when to ask for help, when to offer help. Resilience is about learning from every experience that we have and knowing that, yes, sometimes the falls we have, the problems we have, the biggest dramas in our lives are our best learning opportunities. So actually seeing every bit of feedback, every failure, every blocked route that we try, that's an opportunity for us to learn, to grow stronger. Great. Let's embrace it. And equally, every pressure, every challenge is an opportunity. You know, you don't go to the gym and pick up the easy weights to try and get stronger. That's never going to make us more strong to be able to deal with future challenges. We go up and we push ourselves through pressure, and then we take a recovery and we take a pause so that we can recover and learn and we can rebuild the muscle structures in our body. And the same is true for our minds. We need to put ourselves through pressure in a way that it is effectively considered and intentional, and then have those pauses. A lot of companies making sure we've got fire breaks appropriately in routines, those sorts of ideas, but also within days. And again, we come to the final one where we're bringing in this concept of learning and growth again, which we've touched on in safety and we've touched on in some of those other areas. But learning and growth is about making sure that people feel that they're moving forward through their career, there's experience, they are developing as individuals in their personal skills, in their professional skills, and that is aligned with their values and where they want to go. But there's also a clear pathway for what that looks like. They're making sure they've got the time, the resources that really work for them to go on that journey. And that's a very, very challenging one for companies at the moment who are trying to create more cross-functional learning, maybe taking out some levels of management and saying, well, we don't want people to feel like, well, I've done the training, now I'm automatically going to be a manager. How do we help people to see that training is for their personal development? And maybe that will lead to promotion or increases in different ways. But maybe the growth they want or the need is to move to a different area, different part of the business. We're seeing a lot of companies now revisiting their learning approaches and saying, well, we'll have one channel of development for people who, yes, are people leaders, but we've got a lot of people who are technical specialists who just don't want that leadership role or who aren't cut out for that leadership role because of some other reason. So how do we have different learning pathways for people who are technical specialists? And for a lot of organizations, we've also got people who say, I don't want development. When we've got manufacturing organizations, there are often groups such as drivers who say, I don't want someone to keep talking to me about my development, just want to keep driving. I just want to do that. But actually, are there other ways you can help people feel that they are evolving and learning who maybe don't want to engage in traditional learning methods? If you've got a lot of people who aren't on email every day, who are in factories, how do you engage and keep them learning in a way that is really aligned with what they need for the business, not just a nice thing, but also works for their routines, for their potentially rotas and timeframes that they're in the office, like lots of different elements to consider. And as you'll see with all of these, it is underpinned by positive leadership. Because you need senior leaders to be buying into and understanding all of these elements. You need them to be role modeling. Of course, you need them to be giving you the budget as well, but you need them to truly feel it. Because so often in engagement surveys, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people on today's call maybe see this, the engagement surveys show that people feel that there's a lot of words and there's not much depth to those words. So people need to be practicing what they preach right from the top of the organization, considering it in every decision, in every communication, in everything throughout the organization. Now, as we've seen, there is stuff that gets in the way within everyday life. There are always many, many priorities, and senior leaders, but all levels of the business, there's competing priorities. The number of new legislation announcements this year have meant that suddenly it's like, oh, we've got to stop doing that because we've got to address this. There's new that, right? So there are always competing priorities. You've got to be realistic when you're designing your mental health strategy of what can we really do, and let's do what we do really well. I absolutely can't emphasize that. Do what you do well. Do not try and do some scattergun. I'm going to just do stuff and try and get stuff out there. Think about it. Think about consistency. You're always going to have people who don't want to change. Work with your resistors. There are going to be those barriers to change, but work with those people in your organization who are resistant to get them on board, because they will be your biggest advocates. We need to be conscious of knowing that we never really fully know, and we need to keep learning. And we need to keep helping each other learn how to do this. So many people say, I know what I want to do, but I don't know how. You need to help people at every level of the organization turn the science, the research, the principles into behavior, and sustainable behavior that works for the long time. That's really, really crucial. You don't want, it doesn't matter how many people you get through training. If they only remember a tiny piece of it a week later and 2 months later of it, they've not changed. What a waste of money and time. So make sure we do that. And we need to also keep measuring impact, because that makes a difference. Makes a difference when people see, I've contributed to that because I did keep up my commitment. I did do something differently and it's making a difference. So it helps that motivation. We do see that about transforming that word into action is so powerful. I see Martin's come back on screen. I'm going to just share one more statistic about this really important point of that senior leadership buy-in, that 91% of leaders think that their employees believe they care, right? They go, oh yeah, my employees know that we care as an organization, but 56% of employees actually see that. So very often you need to really do a lot. And I see Jenny's question there into the chat function about, how do we work with the resistors? There's so much we can do, but we really need to give them a voice. We need to give people that voice. I'm not quite sure why that second stat, that 56, is very faint on the page there. But what that says is that 56% of employees believe that senior leaders really care. So even on that resistor level, helping us know, why is it that employees feel that way? What is it that they're interpreting? Because maybe their senior leaders really do care, but helping building that understanding. And then helping leaders to realize that to give that right message to their employees, there needs to be a vision, and that they are behind the strategy and they are thinking about mental health in every layer of their decision making. We need to make sure that they are being open, authentic, while maintaining professionalism. And they need to be leading themselves by example. And that's what the final slide here about transforming words into action is all about. So I'll get Ella to just share that next slide, and I will hand back over to Martin, who I think is going to give me some questions, which I see have been floating in, but there's been so many of them, I've not been able to fully keep track of those myself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. And I'm not sure that I have, because a lot of them are in the chat rather than Q&A, but I'm going to do my very best here. And first of all, that was really good. So thank you very much indeed. I appreciate that. And you can pause for breath for a moment. Yeah, let's just take Jenny's question that you alluded to. Let's just go head on with that. And I've got a couple of others. I think Roz has asked a question, and then there are 3 comments in there at least, which I may turn into questions if we have time. that come from Matthew, Andreas, and Diran. But if you just take Jenny's, if you want to add anything to what you just touched on, if a company wanted to establish a mental health, sorry, that's a different. That's not Jenny's question. I'll ask that one. If a company wanted to establish a mental health strategy, what would be the first step?
I think the first step is to think about the business and ideally work with your senior leaders. That is the best place. And when we usually do this, we will do a workshop for your senior leaders to actually get their views on what this looks like, get them to understand this four element framework, get them to say, what should our priorities be? And get them and give them an opportunity to honestly voice, what are your fears about this? What are your biggest concerns about this? And that comes into Jenny's question about the resistors. You need to let people voice themselves to say, yeah, I think this could go wrong. And we go, okay, well, what would that look like? How can we prevent that happening? What do we need to do? So, senior leader buy-in typically is the best approach as a first step. A lot of companies, though, we've not been able to get that, just not been able to get the time, and we've come in at a slightly different level where we would come in and we would look at existing data and so do it more from engagement surveys or existing surveys, or we would come in and work with HR and L&D teams and start to integrate this messaging into every leadership training, every onboarding. And so you can kind of come in at that middle level and work at an employee level and take more of a bottom up approach. But if you've not got that senior leadership buy-in, it's really going to struggle to be the sustained impact. So it does depend a little bit on different businesses, but ideally starting with the top and always data is going to be your best opportunity to persuade people.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and very elegantly linked to Jenny's question about the resistors. Thank you. Um, that probably is the point at which I should let people know that along with the slides and the recording, Charlotte's very kindly agreed to offer a mental health audit, or what I would call also potentially consultancy or perhaps a bit of a surgery to have a kind of a quick chat about some issues you might be facing. So all the details along with Charlotte's contact details will be in the follow-up as well. And if there are questions that you've put in the Q&A that we haven't got to, with Charlotte's agreement, we'll agree that we will follow those up as part of the follow-up as well. So I will raise Rosa's question, which is, isn't it about compassionate leadership rather than any policy or strategy? Those in senior positions may have extraordinary skills, though zero people skills, no compassion or kindness breaks. I guess this is the challenge of engaging leadership. If we could get there in the first place, that'd be great. But it's a slightly different angle from Rosa's question. What do you think about that, Charlotte?
I think it's an interesting one because I definitely think compassionate leadership is really important. That understanding, so important. However, we also do need policies and processes to help people feel comfortable with what's going on. And I say that because we do quite a lot of focus groups and research with teams. And I've worked with some companies who have got incredibly compassionate leaders. But once you go down to different teams, people say, yeah, but I'm not quite sure. We've got this great policy, but I don't know how to use that, or I don't know what this is, and I don't know what that is. So the compassionate leaders have said, like, oh, we'll give freedom. You can do as many learning courses as you want, or we'll give you this benefit. But because they've given so much freedom to people, and there's nothing that clearly says, okay, you're allowed to do this, to make the most of this, do this. Without that, people almost, it doesn't matter. So they can't make the most of this really compassionate, trusting culture. So I think that's really what's important there is that, yeah, policy can feel a bit, I think policy can feel a bit like accountability, where it's sort of got a negative perception of we're just forcing you to do this and it's just like tick box and there's no compassion behind that. But actually, you can have compassionate strategies and compassionate policies, but it just makes it clear. And that's really what policy should be about, is clarifying the details of what's behind it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I'm nodding my head vigorously there because we sometimes encounter places where people think mental health is a benefit and you're picking and choosing to have benefit. It really isn't. But, it takes a long
Absolutely.
time to change that, but it really isn't. Okay. So I'm going to ask at least two more questions, but just a point, you talked about the easy weights. You don't go to the gym and lift the easy weights. I thought that was a really good point, and that Dr. Fonseca, our founder, often says, the therapist is not your friend. When we're doing mental health support, we're taking you to do some difficult things.
Yeah.
In the process of making you more comfortable in handling your mental health, and we will take you to places which don't, or you're not always comfortable to go in a way that a friend, or sometimes a friend might not, and certainly. ChatGPT won't, but don't get me started on that. Um, Now, so penultimate question, and I wanted to ask you, you talked about work-life harmony. I wanted to attach that to labeling. So you've talked about the whole self being at work, and I guess everybody on the call probably would have the same view. But in reality, there appears to be a driver to label stress as workplace stress or not. Is there an issue around who is then responsible for it, depending on whether you've managed to push it into this box or another, amongst perhaps insurers or OH? Do you think that's a thing, or is that not a thing?
That's a really interesting, it's an interesting one because I guess from a business perspective, regardless of whether someone's stress is coming from the outside world of outside of the workplace, social changes, whatever it is, or internal factors, it is still going to impair how they think and perform on a day-to-day basis. So actually, if you as an employer want to maximize the benefit, the benefit of employing that person and keeping them come to work, it is in your interest to support them regardless of what that stress is. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily your responsibility, and you can't change what's going on for someone outside, certainly in the social and political environment that we're in right now. But what you can think is, what's going to help us as a business if I want people to be coming to work and contributing in the best way they can? It's in my interest to support them to deal with whatever stress shows up for them. And I think you have to have that awareness of what's the benefit. And I think responsibility is a difficult word because as an organization, you can't be responsible for a lot of things about someone, but you can think, okay, what is going to be the best outcome for the business?
No, I agree. I just wish more people did, because listen, I speak to too many CFOs who go, yes, but that's not my problem. If I'm Because it's stressed, it's phrased this way, we deal with it over there, or it's not covered by the service. But we'll
Absolutely.
get there in the end. So I'm going to ask you a final question. Perhaps you may touch on this in your answer. I don't know how you're going to answer this, but I noticed that Matthew's comment and Andrea's comment and Diren's comment and a number of the others are really back around culture, and indeed how the way you answered the question I just asked is back around culture, and I'm not quite sure how we do how what we do with that in actionable terms. But my question to you was, we all know that there are a lot of providers around there who run mental health programs and training for businesses. So, what makes the Step Inside group approach different, do you believe, Charlotte?
I think the science-based approach is definitely something that is very different. Everything about how we design and we work with people is thinking about how does the brain be more willing to accept new perspectives, new conditions, new ways, new things in from their environment. How do you create that condition with the brain so people are more willing to change, but want to change? So shifting from that approach. So everything is always designed in that way. But everyone we work with has either a PhD, a master's. All of our professional team have either a PhD, a master's, or another specialist qualification from their sector. But they also have corporate experience. So we go, how is that practically going to work in a business? And we really champion this idea that we want people to challenge us and say, yeah, that's not going to work in our business. Because we need to be talking about that stuff. And we need to say, okay, well, it's not going to work in your business. So how do we make it work in your business, in your day to day? So it doesn't feel like this add-on, but it feels like something that is just integrated into our everyday behaviors and thinkings and processes. So we're very much about finding that balance, because you tend to get people who'll come with loads of data, they'll give you a lovely theory, a lovely model, and then, well, how do I apply it?
Yeah.
So it's about turning that application. And then we also have a lot of systems that we will integrate with people, with companies, to support that ongoing consistency of how things are being applied. Really, really important that we do that. And we've got a very creative team as well. We're quite, I'm going to say, innovative in our approach to things. We'll make dice to generate a leadership conversation, or give people cards that managers can use as a conversation starter at the beginning of a everyday meetings. You've got to get creative with things so that it doesn't feel like another thing to do, another tick box. You've got to make it fun as well. And we're big believers that creativity and fun are important parts of generating long-term behavior change.
Brilliant. Great answer. So you've got the creativity and what I would call a pivot, which is practically implemented version of a theory. You take it pragmatic and brilliant.
Yeah.
Top work. I need to close off now. We could carry on for ages, but it's been really excellent, Charlotte. So thank you so much for great answers to questions and a great presentation beforehand. We're supposed to have your contact details on here, so I apologize, but our contact details for anybody are there. If you want any follow-up questions, let us know. We will give you Charlotte's contact details at the end, and also in the follow-up email, and this very kind offer that she's made. So thank you to everybody who's attended. And you can imagine you're getting about 100 people still here giving you a round of applause, Charlotte. So I'll do it on my own. But thank you. Great work. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Look after yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.